Welcome back to a complete history of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films, joined as always by the legendary football writer Paddy Barclay to take you on this journey through Old Trafford history. If you're watching this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe, joining the conversation in the comments section if you're watching live or on the replay. If you're listening on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you are listening on. Paddy, the last three episodes, really, we've concentrated on Munich as we talked about what happened before the crash and its aftermath, and then the separate with the squad statistics. This season, the 58-59 season, is one that rarely gets discussed, and you can understand and appreciate why really, because there's such an emotional way we talk about Munich. But life does go on, and it did go on for Manchester United. It went on for Jimmy Murphy, who, after doing such a marvellous job standing in for Busby in the last few months of the season, he was offered jobs elsewhere at Arsenal, Juventus, an unnamed Northwestern club, rumoured to be Liverpool, who Murphy was particularly furious with. Later in 1958, he'd also be linked with the Aston Villa job quite strongly. Indeed, over the summer also included a link to Brazil, where some of the Brazilian contingent who were, in Sweden for the World Cup that summer, who actually knocked Wales out of the World Cup, they were so impressed with what Murphy had done that they offered him a job coaching the national side back in Brazil.
Well, I didn't know that, but there's certainly no question that all the Brazilians say that Wales gave them their hardest game of the tournament. Brazil, of course, won it in '58 with the young Pelé coming in scoring 5 goals in the semi and the final. But their toughest game, they won 1-0, but Wales certainly gave them the toughest game, and that was Jimmy Murphy's Wales. So, I'm sure that they were very, very impressed with Murphy.
Yeah, England obviously only with Bobby Charlton in the World Cup squad, they would have been littered with babes, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. They were knocked out after a group playoff. Obviously, that World Cup, I know this is a podcast about Manchester United and we'll talk about them, but you'd mentioned Pelé in the World Cup final. I mean, when you talk about the big stage and big moments, you've got Maradona 86. People often forget that. But when you watch Pelé's goals in the final, particularly there's one of them where he's flicking it around the defenders. It's just when people dismiss Pelé as just a goal scorer, but you watch that back and you think, what a piece of magic that player was.
Yeah, I believe so. Almost as impactful a teenager as Norman Whiteside. No, seriously.
You will love that.
As every United fan would know, Norman Whiteside made a tremendous impression in 1982. But no, very few people have burst on a World Cup like Pelé did in 1958, and he was undoubtedly the inspiration towards them, winning the final 5-2 against the hosts, Sweden. But yes, that was also notable for all 4 home nations getting there. Scotland, of course, would have had Matt Busby as their manager, their part-time manager. And therefore, the clash between Busby and Murphy as international managers was deferred. You'll have the details of that way.
Yeah, it's coming in the early season, actually. Right. Incidentally, Arsenal's offer to Murphy was so serious that Murphy actually considered it greatly enough to discuss it with John Doherty. Doherty, you'll remember, was an inside forward from recent seasons, but he moved to Leicester in October '57 as part of. I mean, we talked about a lot of players coming into the side, but we haven't talked about the fact that John Doherty had to move on. Jeff Whitefoot. There were a lot of players in that half-back line who just could not dislodge Coleman or Edwards, so they were having to find new clubs. Jeff Whitefoot, one of the youngest players ever to play for the club, has now had to move on. Doherty, with Berry and the emerging Kenny Morgans at the time being so magnificent in form, he had to find a new club, and that was Leicester. But soon after, he suffered a horrendous knee injury and had to have surgery and effectively dropped out of the game. So at the point in the summer of '58, when the Arsenal offer came around, Murphy discussed that the idea of it with Doherty. But the idea would have been that Doherty would have been the assistant at Highbury. But again, Murphy decided to stay loyal to United. I think the idea from Jimmy's perspective was that he was he knew that he was going to be stepping back and taking charge of the reserves and the youth team again. And one of his greatest strengths was facilitating his loyalty to United. So what better way to do that than to say, no, I turned down lucrative offers to go elsewhere. And this is, so United's the place to be. And obviously in the early season, we talked about Busby's convalescence in the previous episode, Paddy. He was still gingerly making his way back into the side, into sort of full charge. So it'd probably take a couple of months until he was fully back into the swing of it. Would you say it's probably fair to say in the early part of the season that Murphy was kind of commanding and Busby was easing his way?
Oh, yes. Jimmy's contribution would definitely lingered on. I mean, bear in mind that Busby had returned in the summer to convalesce. In fact, David Meek told me, the late great David Meek told me that for many summers, for several summers after the crash, Matt would, have a good long holiday. Would continue to convalesce. He went back to Interlaken on this summer, the summer of '58, where he'd been you may remember, on the way back on the long journey back from hospital in Munich, and he returned there during the summer of '58 as well. So yes, Murphy was still the fire of Murphy was still burning as far, or the flag, to give the correct. His hand was very firmly on the flag. Still, as United went into the season, they started the league with 5 crash survivors in the team. They would be Greg Fulks, Albert Scanlon, Dennis Violet, and Bobby Charlton. So there was still a feel of the team that had died. A presence was still there. Yes, definitely.
United won that game 5-2. Incredible Charlton scoring a hat trick. Chelsea's goal scorers on that day were actually Jimmy Greaves. He got both of them. Jimmy Greaves breaking into football. Magnificent goal scorer that he was. So let's talk about the sort of start to that season, because it preceded, actually. We've talked about in previous episodes how United had only just started their pre-seasons, and they were mostly taking place in Germany. And that was the case again here. They returned to Germany by boat and train via Ostend in Belgium. A poignant return. I mean, they lost both of the games. It wasn't about that. It was about the reception that United received. I've got an image of Busby arriving in Hamburg for the second of the friendlies, which, I mean, for people listening on the audio, it's the travelling picture, and a lot of sort of locals there to greet the United travelling picture. And Busby looks like a film star in the middle of it with sunglasses on. Paddy, I mean, the point was, I mean, at this point, and we'll talk about Busby giving up to fly again in the later parts of this podcast, but at this point, there was still a lot of nervousness around travel for United. So when you think about the fact that this is just 6 months after the crash, to go back to Germany and sort of combat this sort of grief head on, incredibly brave from some of these people.
Yes, they were, and I mean, at this stage, they certainly avoided air travel sensibly enough. In fact, around this time, Bobby Charlton was on a flight with England, and that was clearly an ordeal. Bobby Robson, I remember him saying that he'd been sitting next to Bobby on the plane on the England party, and Bobby was gripping was clearly very, very nervous, and at one stage muttered something along the lines of, "Just get this bloody plane down," as it circled ready for landing. So perfectly understandable. But Manchester United at this stage were still some months away from being ready to travel by air again.
Early September, they sign they break the club record to sign Albert QUIXALL, a
Yes.
rare player to have been missed by United when he was younger, but now signed. A lot of implications here, Paddy, because a lot of people don't really. I guess they do know that United are in financial difficulties, but there are some threads tied to this which are interesting. I'll put up the picture of QUIXALL signing while you tell the story.
Yes. Well, the thing about it, that they break this world record. I can remember as a child hearing that the bereaved Manchester United had spent £45,000, which was a sort of jaw-dropping sum, to sign this player who I think we might have come across him before. He playing well for Sheffield Wednesday against United, and yes, he was the golden boy, a glamorous footballer, but very modest in his character. And this fee, to put it in a bit of context, Manchester United. I mean, it seems ridiculous to talk about money in the context of Munich, but the point is that they did lose, an untold riches in the players who perished, and they were underinsured. The payout was just £100,000 spread over 5 years. So in this particular season, they got their policy realised only £20,000. So they had to sell a lot of players, United, to scrape together the QUIXALL fee. I mean, this was not a club with any money. They still, after the misfortune of the ground being bombed during the war, they was just about coming to recover from that when Munich came along, and as I say, Munich was shouldn't be confused with monetary issues, but they were underinsured, and that was another financial setback. So for Busby to break that record was a very, very bold move, but he did it, and he had to sell Ernie Taylor. You remember we spoke about in the last episode, who'd come in immediately after Munich, veteran from midfielder from Blackpool. He went. Who were the others who went? I mean, Gibson, Don Gibson, who by now is Busby's son-in-law, married to Busby's daughter Sheena. He goes. And there were others, weren't there? There were Kenny Morgans went.
Morgan's was a while away, but Stan Crowther.
Stan Crowther had come in at the same time as Taylor. Stan Crowther, you may remember, had a great game against United when Villa beat United in the cup final, and he came in the wake of Munich as the sort of quick repair, but he didn't fit in personally. And Busby wasn't crazy about him. He wasn't a popular dressing room figure. And what helped, he was a wing half midfield player, and what helped Busby to get rid of him, to sell him, was the emergence of Wilf McGuinness.
Yeah.
As a serious player in midfield, and again a wing half, local boy, and really no one connected with Manchester United needs any introduction to him. But he was a young player seizing his opportunity, so that helped. Busby knew he could get rid of Crowther because Wilf was showing such promise and such grit, all the qualities that Crowther had been bought for.
Yeah, McGuinness had been injured just before Munich, so if he'd have been fit, there's every chance that Crowther might not have even been signed anyway. The other player, we talk about Crowther and the sort of behavioural aspects of it. The same could be said for Colin Webster. He'd been brought through the club, and I know it's been signed at an early age, not necessarily.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. It was Colin. I said Kenny Morgans instead of Colin Webster. Of course, that was wrong. Yes, Colin Webster, another player who could play through the middle or wide. Again, there were personality problems there. Busby didn't like him, and so he was sold as well.
Incredible, really. Taylor and Crowther gone before the end of the calendar year. And they're so synonymous with Munich and having stepped in the way that they did. But their careers at the club so short, but nonetheless significant for what they did step into the breach with many of these players as well. Talk about the European Cup, such that it was. I mean, United were invited back to play in the competition, and they were actually drawn against Young Boys when the first draw was made. But then the Football League stepped in, said that United weren't allowed to play. This was the time. This time, United didn't win the fight, Paddy, with Busby perhaps not wanting to go too head to head, considering what had happened.
think yes, Busby and Chairman Harold Hardman were very keen to be able to play. They didn't expect to mount another challenge for the European Cup with the post Munich team, but they would have liked the revenue because crowds were the country as well as Manchester was rallying round the club after Munich. Crowds were very healthy, and there would undoubtedly have been a full house, even if they only had one game in Europe. So United definitely wanted to take up UEFA's invitation. I think it ought to be said that it was a generous move by UEFA to say that in the circumstances, champions Wolves would be accompanied into the draw by Manchester United. But yes, the Football League said only champions could take part, and you can understand why Hardman and Busby were hopping mad about that.
Yeah, the tie was played anyway. As friendly games, Young Boys were given a draw in the bye in the competition, but in the first leg in Switzerland, United lost 2-0, and in the second leg won 3-0. So they would have advanced, and Wolves incidentally didn't impress too much themselves, did they, in the competition? So,
but so much for Stan Cullis's claim that he had the best team in the world. They got knocked out first round, I think, in Germany.
So United, obviously Busby now concentrate on matters at home. But the form after that promising start to the season quickly tailed off. The reality of the squad composition hitting home, the number of changes that were having to be made. The fact that, the reality, United had been galvanised by this cup run in the latter part of the previous season, but they didn't have that. They had a reality of a rebuild and the emotional significance and the weight of the grief. Busby still coming back to terms with. And then the fact that these were big footballing matters to deal with. There were big calls that he was still having to make. He included making Dennis Violet captain because he saw that Bill Foulkes was struggling with that, and also the recovery of the crash, but also he was readapting to centre back, which was a new position for him. He wanted to take the weight off his shoulders. And at the same time, while United are in this poor run of form, Paddy, they play a game up at Everton, which neither Busby or Murphy's in charge of. Jack Crompton is in charge of Manchester United as they lose 3-2 to managerless Everton. Where in the world are Jimmy Murphy and Matt Busby if they are not at Goodison Park?
Yes. Well, they were in opposition, as we hinted at earlier. Scotland, under Matt Busby, who'd promised to be manager during the World Cup. Obviously, he couldn't keep that because he was in hospital or recovering from or in convalescence. But he did keep his promise to look after Scotland, and he went off to Cardiff, where Jimmy Murphy was lying in wait as his opponent for once. And Busby gave an international debut that day down in Cardiff to an 18-year-old whose name was Dennis Law. And he was at that time playing towards the bottom of the second division with Huddersfield, managed by Bill Shankly. And in another bold move he gave the Scotland captaincy to a 23-year-old called Dave Mackay. So further evidence of Busby's excellent judgment of a footballer in the promotion of those two young men. Law underlined that by opening the scoring. Scotland won 3-0. So Busby 3, Murphy 0. However, when they made their separate ways back to Manchester, their pleasure was, or at least Busby's pleasure, and perhaps Murphy's frustration, was diluted by the news from Goodison. Jack Crompton had been in charge. United lost 3-2 to a lowly Everton, as you rightly said, managerless, because they were waiting for Johnny Carey, United's old captain, and Busby's trusted lieutenant on the field. Johnny Carey had started his managerial career at Blackburn Rovers, and he'd now been attracted by Everton. But while they were waiting for him, they did have the rare joy of beating United 3-2. Questions were being asked. I mean, I'm not saying QUIXALL was made a scapegoat for results or performances like the one at Goodison, but there was a feeling that for such a gifted player, he should be more expressive and confident, and maybe bang the ball in the net a couple of times, but he was just acting as a team player. And the United fans, for 45,000, this extraordinary fee, expected a bit more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. United was struggling in the league, it should be said. You mentioned Warren Bradley in the last episode, and I bring him up here to talk about the other changes that have been happening at the club. Now, Bradley arrived alongside Derek Lewin and Bob Ardistry, the other two Bishop Auckland players who came in to help. Now, the stigma around amateur clubs wasn't as it is today, because there were professional clubs that were split. I mean, the third division had a north and south, so it's so many professional clubs that were at the time, and how big the football and that. And you already mentioned in the previous episode about how Bishop Auckland were practically the most famous amateur team. They won the amateur FA Cup for 2 years running or something like that. Yeah. So they were really at the height of their own game.
And the amateur cup final was not only held at Wembley, but it packed the place out. You would get when Bishop Auckland, but I think they might have won about 3 cup finals in a row under Don Hardesty as the captain. I remember his bald head being raised, and I remember seeing the photographs of it. And the final would be televised, and it would draw a crowd of 100,000. So, yeah, I mean, these guys were used to the big time, and Bradley was actually it was a sort of coming home for him to come to United, because he'd been born in Hyde, just up the road from Manchester, and become an amateur international. And Busby had always had an eye on him, and he definitely made a huge impression after coming to Old Trafford. And although the three as amateurs were unable to play for the first team, Busby saw so much in Bradley that he offered him a part-time professional contract, which allowed him to play for the first team while pursuing his main ambition. He was a modest man, and his main ambition was, he was a teacher, and his main ambition was to become a headmaster. FA Amateur Cup medals and playing for Man United, and later he played for England, were one thing, but what he really wanted was to become a head teacher.
Remarkable. They did, like you said, they came in as amateurs. So while they couldn't play in the reserve team, in the first team, what they were doing is playing in the reserve and the A team, and providing with the valuable assistance there. The senior, obviously, because of Munich, the young players were being drafted in a lot more quickly, so they needed senior guidance. Where Murphy's attention was diverted to the first team temporarily, and obviously they didn't have Bert Wally, they didn't have Busby, Tom Curry. They needed these experienced heads around, and it was critical, it was crucial. And to give you an example reserve team from the start of the season, Ray Wood, Smith, Carolan, we'll speak about him in a moment, Crowther, Harrop, Bradley, Giles, Brennan, Pearson, Morgan. Some of those names familiar, some of them not familiar, because a bit of a hash of what United are dealing with at the moment. There's no genuine plan. In days gone by, you would have a couple of players like Folks, perhaps now retraining in a new position. He was having to do that on the job in the first team. We'll see how that develops over the next couple of seasons. You'd have a smattering more players like Giles, players breaking their way in, but also you've got the likes of Brennan, Harrop, Pearson, Morgans, who were dealing with the aftermath of.
Yes, well, you see, those positions, I mean, several of those players would not have got in the reserve side because of players who perished, Jeff Bent, for example, who was a quality player, was definitely a first team class player. So they had the likes of Bent, Cope, so on, in the reserves, who frankly could come into the first team and you wouldn't really notice the difference. They were that good. As you say, now it was sort of make, do, and mend.
Yeah, Busby sort of made a decision in the winter time, didn't he? So it's like, I'm going to cut back on my international commitments. I'm going to look at what's happening at United more seriously. So those sales were made, the promotion of Violet's captain, and it's no coincidence that once Busby started really not refocusing, but once he was able to fully commit back to Manchester United in the way that he'd been, United's form completely transformed, and I think it's probably largely down to the fact that Busby was able to be more iron-fisted around control.
Yeah, he only had two matches with Scotland. His second, there was the Wales one where Murphy was vanquished. That he then oversaw a 2-2 draw with Northern Ireland at Hampden Park, and then he decided to focus entirely on Manchester United. Although it wasn't a wholly resurgent winter, because the third round of the cup, or the early round, I think it was
the third.
Third round of the cup brought a fairy tale. Wonderful, you might think, but not if you're a Man United fan, because you're on the wrong end of it. And Norwich City, I remember, again, I was a kid at the time, and Norwich City were among the great cup fighters. And although they were in the third division, probably third division south at that time, they were really one of the great stories of the season. And their run, which got to the semi-finals, well, a third division team get into the semi-finals, they knocked out United at first at Carrow Road, and they also knocked out Tottenham on their way to the semi-finals. But in the league, it was a different story, Wayne, wasn't it?
Yeah, United really did go on a run of. They went unbeaten for a few months, actually, as Busby did take full control back again. And at that point, because they'd started the season so poor, I mean, there's a run where they lost 6 in 8, so they were never, and they were down in 15th at one point. They were never going to really challenge for the league, but out of that, because Wolves were runaway winners, that it wasn't as runaway as it might have been, and also the other thing is that United were never close enough to really be considered realistic challengers. I mean, there's a period where they did actually go top of the table twice, but towards the end of the season, what had happened is Wolves had accumulated a backlog of postponed games, so United were playing 3 games in front of Wolves, and you knew that really, even though United were like top by a point, you knew that Wolves were going to turn that around. It wasn't like United was seriously competing for the title. Do you think that would be fair, or do you think I'm being a bit?
Yeah, it is fair, but it was still a great season. They ended up second, as you say, and it was still that was an amazing achievement considering the background of Munich.
Yeah.
Also, what was good was that there was the strength of the team was the attack. Charlton had a magnificent season. He was in line actually for Footballer of the Year at one stage. Sid Owen of Luton got it, the veteran centre half. But Charlton would have been one of the other people that the Football Writers Association members would have considered, definitely. And Scanlon, he deserves mention, Albert Scanlon, because as we've mentioned in previous episodes, he was vying with David Pegg until Pegg's tragic death at Munich. Scanlon certainly, stepped up to his responsibilities. He too had a very good season. Dennis Violet, Charlton's mate, and who was sitting next to him, who, when they survived Munich, they were hurled out of the plane. Violet as well, doing so well that, as you mentioned before, Busby gave him the captaincy when Bill Foulkes found it too much. So there was a lot to like about United's season, even though Wolves actually won their third title, Cullis, under Cullis. So that Cullis now had 3 titles and 1 FA Cup. So once again, Cullis and Busby, these 2 great managers, were level pegging in their friendly rivalry.
Yeah, you're quite right. I think there was a quote from Busby at one point through the season where he acknowledged that, not a false position, but
He said, to finish what they'd achieved in the 15 months in, he said, it gave a false impression of our strength.
yeah,
And I think he felt that Wolves were going to be there or thereabouts again next season. United really were going to have to, yes, it was good. It was very good to have got to be among the contenders 15 months after Munich. But Busby was already getting his fierce ambition and wanted to do back and wanted to do even better.
yeah. I think you might also say that without wanting to denigrate the strength of the league, the fact that United could be languishing in 15th in November and then
Yes,
finished second sort of gives an indication of how there wasn't a serious competitor for Wolves that season.
no,
But that, again, not to denigrate their own success, such that it was, even though, of course, they didn't quite get that in Europe.
no.
Let's go through the squad then. Harry Gregg, remarkable. We don't talk really enough about the remarkable Harry Gregg, Bobby Charlton, and Bill Foulkes just played relentlessly. Bill Foulkes and Harry Gregg went from playing every single game in the previous season to Gregg playing almost every game this season, 41 in all appearances. 41 in the league, 42 in all appearances. Ray Wood stepping in for that single game.
Yeah,
In the single league game that he played as well. So that we moved to the fullbacks. Bill Foulkes played 32 in the league, 33 in all appearances. Ian Greaves made 34 appearances in the league as the right back. I know he did previously stepped in at left back, but now he was the dominant right back there. Joe CAROLAN, you'll see on screen. Now, he came into the side, an Irish left-back who started the season in the reserves. He was a winner of the Youth Cup in 1957. Obviously, now, because of the decimation of the left-hand side of the team, he had an opportunity to get into the side. And another of those infamous positional shifts, Paddy started as a half-back. That was his position in the Youth Cup, but now his left-sided prowess really helping the first team he made. 23 appearances in the league, 24 in all competitions. Shea Brennan, as you remember, just makes one single league appearance this season as he, again, we're talking about the emotional toll of the disaster as much as anything. The players just sort of taking a little bit. Busby and Murphy doing a wise job by keeping some of the players out of the spotlight, as we'll come across a few of them in a moment. Ronnie Cope coming into the halfback line. I'll put this tactics up in a moment. He played a number of games, 32 in the league, 2 goals, 33 appearances in all competitions. Stan Crowther, just 2 appearances in the league before his departure. Mostly he was playing in the reserves after the turn of the season. The halfback line was dominated by Freddie Goodwin and Wilf McGuinness. Goodwin, right half. Imagine the difficulty that he had to. I mean, he was basically filling Eddie Coleman's boots and played a single game in the league that season, scoring 6 goals every single game in all competitions. Actually played against Norwich as well. Bobby Harrop, remember from the last episode, he stepped in for 5 league appearances. McGuinness making 40 appearances in all competitions, scoring a single goal, 39 in the league. We'll move on to the forward line now. Warren Bradley, as we already discussed earlier on. Yeah, he impressed in the reserves so much that, as Paddy said, Busby was forced to give him this part-time professional contract in November. But he had to take a job as a teacher to supplement his income. And he did actually, yeah, he did say, all I wanted to be was a head teacher. So he did achieve that ambition, by the way, by 1968, by which time, as Paddy said, he'd played for Manchester United and England. If there was a concern about him because he was 25, why didn't he ever make it into the professional game before? There was a little bit of concern that 5'5", he was a little bit short to be playing in the front line. Also, that there was a bit of an injury worry with his knees sometimes, but United had already had a short outside right in Johnny Berry, so they have no problems with that. He was a magnificent, mature stand-in for Johnny Berry, and Kenny Morgan's on the right. Morgan's falling victim to Munich being too much for him. Morgan's played only 2 appearances in the league that season. Reg Hunter was the other deputy on the right-hand side. He played 1 single appearance. Another FA Youth Cup winner. He was given a chance on December 27th against Aston Villa. United lost. They won 2-0. So he did a little wrong, you would presume, but it did turn out to be Reg's only appearance for the club. Warren Bradley, by that point, coming and being the senior player on that side of the pitch. The other forwards, Alex Dawson, we mentioned him in previous episodes. Just 11 appearances this season and 4 goals. And we talked about how incredible he did in the months after Munich. This, again, I think, just a sign that the emotional toll on a player like him. And Mark Pearson, 4 appearances in the league and a single goal. You can already tell that it's a lot for these player burden. And these players, Dawson and Pearson, do well for the reserves, but, obviously it's difficult for them. Colin Webster, we mentioned, he left early in the season, 5 goals in 7 games in the league before he did. Dennis Violet, 21 goals in 37 in the league, 38 appearances in all competitions. Ernie Taylor, 11 appearances without a goal before he departed. Albert Scanlon on the left-hand side, 16 goals in 43 appearances in all competitions, 42 of those in the league. You mentioned Bobby Charlton. He was the top goal scorer this season with 29 goals in 38 games. Incredible return. 39 appearances in all competitions, 38 of those in the league. And finally, Albert QUIXALL, the golden boy, as he was described, signed for 45,000 to try. And you talked about the difficulty that he had selling, that perhaps didn't have the cocksure confidence of the forwards that he was replacing, or the guile of a Billy Whelan, even though everyone was probably looking naturally for a Tommy Taylor replacement. Well, Violet and Charlton chipped in with the goals to replace that, so he didn't really need to worry too much about goal scoring because United went on to score over 100 in the league. That wasn't a problem. But for QUIXALL, it was. He only scored 4 goals in 33 appearances. And he wasn't really the same as a Taylor or a Whelan. He was 25 when he finally arrived from Sheffield Wednesday. Said 4 goals in 34 appearances in all competitions, 33 of those in the league. Now, I said earlier on that he'd had a chance to sign for United when he was younger. Well, Jimmy Murphy had actually recalled how Bert Wally had seen Albert QUIXALL 8 or 9 years earlier playing football on Blackpool Beach. And he approached him, Bert Wally, and said, I'll give you a trial with United. QUIXALL told him he'd already signed terms with Sheffield Wednesday at that point. Now, read a quote from QUIXALL, because obviously it sounds like he had a traumatic introduction to the team, but his teammates appreciated him for sure. Bobby Charlton said he played a significant role in my rush of goals. When I broke through on an offside trap, often it was to get onto the end of one of Albert's perfectly placed passes. So he was doing his job in a more understated way, but just not delivering the goals that people would probably
a player's player.
Yeah. Let's go through the tactics. You're going to see a very different team. 8 or 9 play, well, 8 plays at least. They're going to be very different. Harry Gregg in goal, obviously ever present. Ian Greaves now the dominant right back. Bill Foulkes moving into the middle. Joe Carolan, the left back. Freddie Goodwin, the mainstay in the half back line, and McGuinness's regular partner. And you got that forward line there, Albert QUIXALL and Bobby Charlton. The inside forwards, but I'm going to show you a lineup in a moment that indicates a change in how the forwards were playing at this point in time.
Yeah.
Warren Bradley and Albert Scanlon, the wingers, and Dennis Violet, a de facto centre forward. But we've said before, I mean, QUIXALL, Charlton, and Violet were all inside forwards. They were never really renowned as centre forwards in the way that Tommy Taylor was. And perhaps that's reflected in this lineup, Paddy, we'll see against Birmingham. So you've got Violet playing as 9 in a withdrawn role. Now, if you're looking at this in your
it's the first false 9, isn't it?
possibly, or false 10 and a false 8 as well. But you'll see there on the lineup that he's still one of those that's got Cope playing in a halfback line instead of
yes. You know my obsession with that, but that's very interesting. That was an away game program, wasn't it?
At Birmingham,
yeah. There's an advert for a Birmingham company, Electrical Trade Supply Limited. That's interesting. That Violet was there in between the withdrawn wingers. I think that's more down to the program editor. Than because yes, Dennis did. I think Charlton. My impression was that Charlton and I mean, you read the quote from Charlton, a tribute to Violet, that when he broke off a defender, off the centre half, that QUIXALL would find him. So obviously Charlton and Violet shared the strikers' duties. In fact, they possibly played 4 up front a lot of the time. I mean, my recollection was that that in other words they had 2 number 10s instead of a 9 and a 10, because of at that time the irreplaceability of Tommy Taylor.
It's one of those things. Well, because they were all inside forwards, or nominally known as inside forwards,
but they were goal scorers. I mean, you've just read out Violet's scoring, which was more than a goal every other game. That's a striker's return, not an attacking midfield player's return. So those Charlton and Violet would have interchanged. Both would have been expected to chip in with lots of goals, and to be fair, they did.
Absolutely. The administration for this season, the United Review remains the same as it ever has. The handshake on the front there.
Yes.
United's colours still remain red, white, and black. And now the blue away strip has more or less been done away with, and United predominantly playing white away from home. The average attendance at this for this season at Old Trafford was 53,258. Key results, Paddy. I would think that maybe losing 6-3 at Bolton in November seemed to be a definitive fork in the road. Where, as regard Busby saying like, "This can't go on. I'm going to need to make some big changes here." And then by the time that United won against Wolves, the champions-elect, in February, it did follow an emotional couple of weeks following the first anniversary of the disaster, where United had done quite well. I think that the day after the anniversary, they played at Spurs and won 3-1. Then they battered City a week later, and then they went and won against Wolves. So it really started to show for the first time that there could be a future with prosperity. Even though, as we've already indicated, Busby wasn't getting too carried away. I think he saw that there was some major changes that needed to be made. Elsewhere in football, Paddy, Wolves, as we've already said, won the league. Rail went on to win another European Cup, so kind of rinse and repeat, really. Their eras of domination continuing to and obviously Brazil winning the World Cup in the previous year, which was the start of their glorious dynasty in football, with Pelé leading it. So that's United's first season after Munich. We're covered as comprehensively as we possibly could, really. If you're watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. Even if you're watching on replay, we'd like to get back and discuss the season with you. If you're listening to the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time to discuss the United's 59-60 season.